So, what I wanted to say at the very beginning, I'll quote myself just to get started. I am not a scholar. I'm only someone who has marked Purim at home and alone and had chances to read the Megillah without interruption. Each time I read it, I find something new. So, I'm not proposing this is what Purim is. I think that I said last week, right? This is not what I'm saying. This is what it could be, right? This is what it might be today. Okay. Um, because I think it should be obvious actually that if we look at the history of Purim, we would see that it's been celebrated in different ways at different times with with different foci, right? Depending on what's going on, right? One of the interesting things about Purim is that it's a diaspora holiday. It's not a land of Israel holiday. Forgive me, Michael, but it's not connected particularly to agriculture. Almost every other holiday that is Palestine based, that's from the land, does have that quality to it. And I love that quality about Yiddishkeit, I got to say. I mean, there are a lot of times people ask me, well, what do you do? I say, I'm a gardener. That's who I am, right? And one of the beautiful things about living where I live is that without the heat that Israel has, the climate is actually very similar. So I feed my birds from basically from Sukkot until Pesach, right? Um, I can follow that cycle, and it means something to me. And it means something to me in my life. I mean, to put up the sukkah, to put up a sukkah is like creating, the beginnings of a kind of winter home. Yeah, it leaks, the roof leaks, of course, but there is something special. And I always hope that the rain won't start until the end of Sukkot, right? I mean, what is Shmini Atzeret but the extra day that we put on when we pray for rain? That's the day, right? The first 7 days of Sukkot, we don't want it to rain because we're all in Jerusalem and, in Sukkot on the roofs and having a great party, right? And by the way, I'm getting sidetracked, but one of the most beautiful little stories I like about it is that if you count up the number of sacrifices that were offered during Sukkot, you get 70. No other holiday has that. And what is 70? 70 is the number which stands for the total number of nations in the world. So the Sukkot story is that in the Second Temple period, we actually used to invite representatives. It's like the Olympics, spiritual Olympics. And we invited everybody to come, and then everybody left on Hoshana Rabbah, and God said, okay, Atzeret, right? You guys stay another day. Let's eat leftovers together, and it'll be just us for a while, right? Just the hosts, right? Well, I love that little story. What a nice way to do. Think of, and then you pray for rain and you go home quick, right? Before the rain actually begins, because once it begins, it actually becomes dangerous. In ancient Israel, it became dangerous because the wadis would fill with water and you could easily get, you know, it would be like a flood, a raging river all of a sudden. Anyway, okay. So that is, that just to say that is how I feel. Um, but this time I'm really interested, I've been interested in lately in Purim as it might be today, even for me without being in a shul or for you, wherever you will be, that I'm interested in that because I figured out ever since Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, right? I have been in an ongoing, often repeating spiritual crisis, right? I want to know why that happened. Why are the people, the good guys, right? The people on our side, I'm assuming that holds true for us, but why did they become so blind that they allowed themselves to die, to continue to pretend that they weren't fading in terms of age, like Joe Biden, when all they had to do was get out of the way at the right moment and things would be very different than they are now. So what is that, right? And for what then am I praying? Why am I praying? Why am I focused on God? So the classic, the best one, I think I said this last week. The best one, of course, is Shabbat, right? Because what is Shabbat? Me'ein olam haba. So what we do is one day in seven, we create as much as we can, as best as we can, a world which is like the one we imagine it will be when everything is okay, right? And we try to live in that one day a week as best we can, right? That's what we do. That's why we have our best food on, like out here. I don't eat pieces of salmon during the week. Friday night, that's my chicken, right? That's what I eat. I eat the best food I can, well, the best food that I can make, which is of course not the best food that can be made, but nevertheless, it is what I do. And that effort that we make to live in a future which has not happened yet, right? So what did I call Purim? And actually, Reb Mark read me this great quote. Can you do that one again?
The line from my song.
Yeah. Is that your line? You made that line? You wrote that line?
Like I explained to you, I don't take credit for it. The Ruach
It came to
HaKodesh,
you.
yeah, it
Okay.
really came through me.
But
And I'll sing it to you.
mhm.
Once upon a time, there was the silence. Hope was still a memory of future days ahead.
Hope was still memory of future days ahead, right? What did I say? I didn't know this until just a few minutes before we started. But what did I say last week about Purim? It's a history which hasn't yet happened. Yeah, yeah, that's what it is. So in what sense, okay, let's look for example. Do you have that? Do you have the text that I gave out?
Yes, I put it into the chat for
Okay,
people
good.
all to click on.
Yeah, and I'd love to keep seeing your faces. So, anyway, so this is an interesting thing. Here's the quote. The first one is the quote from chapter 9, verse 28 of the Megillah, right? Which says, "V'hayamim ha'ela nizkarim v'na'asim b'chol dor v'dor mishpacha u'mishpacha medina u'medina ve'ir va'ir v'imei ha'purim ha'ela lo ya'avru mitoch ha'Yehudim v'zichram lo yasuf mizaram." Right? These days are recalled and observed in every generation by every family, every province, and every city. And these days of Purim shall never cease among the Jews, and the memory of them shall never perish among their descendants. So then, what does the Midrash on Mishlei on Proverbs say? Um, uh, yeah, where it says Amar Rabbi Avahu, right? Rabbi Avahu said, Af archa shulchana, right? That her table is prepared. She'archala shulchan ba'olam hazeh u'ba'olam haba. Now, I have to confess, I don't remember what the context of this exactly is and how they said it, but he's saying that she set up a table for herself, prepared a table for herself, right? You know the expression Shulchan Aruch, right? That's what it means, the prepared table, right? This is where they put all the halacha out on the table, and all you have to do is go and do it, right? Just take it, taste it. But that's the principle. So she set up her table in this world and in the next world. The Eza, and what is that? Zeh Shem Tov Shekantala Ba'olam Hazeh U'Ba'olam Haba. This is the good name which she has acquired for herself in this world and the next world. I'm really sorry. I should have put in whatever the whole context of that is because I don't know exactly what they were talking about, but I think they're talking about Purim because then it goes on to say Shakol HaMoadim Atidim Betelim. All the holidays in the future will be discontinued, right? V'yemei HaPurim einam betelim lolam. But Purim will not be discontinued forever. Will always be there. Shneamar v'yemei HaPurim ha'ela lo yavru mitoch haYehudim. That's what I read before, right? As it is written that these days of Purim will never pass away, right, from within the Jews. So the midrash here is saying something, very interesting, right? That in the end, when the Purim story becomes real history, right, or present, real present, when that happens, then, right, the the holiday of Purim will remain, but all the other holidays will go away. It's a pretty strong statement, right? But the way it was said to me at some point in my life, they would say, well, Pesach is just the beginning of the redemption. And if the redemption is complete, what do we need Pesach for anymore? Let's celebrate the complete redemption, not the beginning of it so many thousands of years ago. Why that takes away from, the other meanings, right? I don't imagine. So we could say, if we wanted to say it this way, that the some of the historical and in a sense spiritual dimensions of these holidays might be discontinued, but the agricultural ones would certainly remain because that's going to continue, right? You still have to plant and cultivate and so on. Yes, Devar, you want to say something?
But don't we traditionally recount our stories so we know where we came from?
Yes, and I don't, listen, it's hard to know how literally they meant these. I think the Rambam, next and the last one, will probably answer your question to some degree, right? That we, you know, we this is a separate issue, right? But what we Jews like to do is add. We don't like to subtract, right? So, do we need two Siddharim, right? Do we need the first day of Pesach done twice? No, we don't. We have known exactly which day Pesach comes out on since the year, believe it or not, 350 of the Common Era, which is when Hillel the second released the mathematical formula for the calendar, which in fact everybody knew already anyway. So that whole business of, we didn't see the new moon in time and the people in the diaspora are not going to be clear. They're not going to know for sure which is the 14th of Nisan and which is the 15th of Nisan. So if they celebrate Pesach on both nights, then they'll hit the right one once, right? Do we need to keep that? No. Why do we keep it? Because we don't like minus signs. So we haven't proposed, I mean, there are people who do a third Seder, right? There are people who do another Seder when their families can get there, right? So they may do a third, or there's a third Seder tradition at the end of Pesach, right? But nobody's proposed tripling the first day, right? But doubling the first day is still very much in practice. Now, it helps in modern times because if the couple is married, then they can go to one family's house for the first night and the other family's house for the second night. And, that's a North American thing that works, in some ways. Personally, one Seder is enough, I think. And let all the families come together for one Seder and let them talk to each other. Maybe they should learn to like each other better. But the point is we don't like to do that. And so what happens is, of course, the tradition gets incredibly top heavy, right? And then you have to have this sort of radical cutback, right? Going back. So do we like to tell our story? The answer is yes. But do we have to tell the same story that we told for 2,000 years when that story has reached its fulfillment? Right? What's at the end of the Pesach Seder? L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, right? Next year, right? By the way, you want to know how messianic, how immediate messianic wishes were for so many Jews for so long. There was a tradition, and I read about it, and it was actually, I think, recent, that when the invitation to the bar mitzvah or the wedding would be sent out, and it would say, the bar mitzvah of our son, so and so, right, will take place at the Western Wall in the rebuilt Jerusalem next year. And if the Messiah has not come, it will take place at Temple Bethel in Sudbury. Right? That's how they would do it. Yeah. Now, I want to say that on purpose, though, because that's really important, right? Why, where do I personally find the strength and the commitment to keep going when it looks like, right, it's lost, right? It's gone. How do you do that? Because we're in a time, and as I think I said last week, yes, you guys are experiencing something. I mean, what you experienced in Washington, whatever, a couple of months ago or whenever it was, is way more than we're experiencing in terms of the immediacy of the violence and the autocratic behavior. But remember that every time Trump changes his tariffs, Canadians go crazy because what do you do then? And how are we selling cars in the States or are we not selling cars? And do we have jobs or do we not have jobs? And what should be, we have a different attitude towards government, similar, I suppose, to the mayor of New York, which is that we believe the government has a place to play in the economy. It has a legitimate role in the economy. But what is that role if you can't predict it, right? Business hates these things because they go back and forth, and you don't get any certainty in it, right? Why did I say that? Where did that start from? Oh, having Purim in this, in this climate, right? So I'm saying, how do we go about doing that? Right? And one way, well, let's do the last text, and then I'll finish this up. By the way, I do consciously admit that if I take even these days a fairly small verbal digression from what I'm aiming to say, I might forget it. I might forget what I was aiming to say. And either you'll have to help me recover it, or I'll have to recover it with a pause, or I'll just lose it. Okay, it didn't used to happen. I used to be able to take multiple tangents and come back and always steer myself back to where we needed to be. But I'm not as good at that as I used to be.
Steve Silvern calls that the squirrel effect.
The squirrel effect?
Yeah, the dog says, squirrel.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay. Right. So, yes. Okay, so then where was I? Oh, yeah, so the text. So the last text I had is from the Rambam, talking about the laws of the Megillah. And he says, Kol Sifrei HaNevi'im. I'm going to make it bigger so I can read it without leaning forward. Okay. Kol Sifrei HaNevi'im v'chol HaKtuvim atidin levatel li'mot HaMashiach chutz mi-Megillat Esther. So the Rambam phrases it a little differently, and here, Tavora, it sort of fits a little better with your question. The Rambam says all the books of the prophets and all their writings will be discontinued at the time of the Mashiach, chutz mi-Megillat Esther, right? With the exception being the scroll. So he's not saying we won't celebrate Pesach anymore. Right? What he's saying is we may not read the Haggadah, but it doesn't mean we won't celebrate Pesach, if that works. V'harei hi kayemet kechamisha chumshei Torah, and the scroll of Esther will endure like the 5 books of Moses. Now that's a very strong statement, right? Because that's Torah, right? So that's the Torah. V'chahalachot shel Torah sheba'al peh she'einam b'telim ba'olam. And here, Devari really answers your question, right? He really addresses your question because he says, and all the halacha, right? All the practices of the Torah, the oral Torah, oh no, they never get suspended. That means in the end, of course, Pesach as we do it will still happen, right? That's what he's saying. We may not read the same book. We may do it in a different way, which we're already doing, but they will still be there. The afal pisha kol zichron hatzarot yivutal. But what will be discontinued, is all of the memories of the troubles. Now, I don't think he means that we'll forget the troubles. It means that we won't have to go over them, right? Oy, was that bad? Oy, do you remember that year? But that year was so bad, right? Oy, right? It's so bad now. And then 10 years from now, we'll say, oh, you remember how bad it was 10 years ago, right? That kind of thing won't happen, which would actually be very nice for us, I think, as Jews. As it's written in Yeshayahu and Isaiah, Ki nishkachu hatzarot harishanot v'chi nizkaru me'eini. So he's saying just as all of the former difficulties, as the translation says, will be forgotten and they will be hidden from my eye. Yemei HaPurim lo yibatlu, but the days of Purim will not, I keep want to say obliterated because batel kind of means that, but it's not that heavy. That they'll be discontinued. As it is written, V'yemei HaPurim ha'ele lo yavru mitoch ha'Yehudim v'zichram lo yasuf mizaram. The same quote that both the Midrash, that I started with, that the Midrash uses and the Rambam uses. Right? So the Rambam is giving a rabbinic sort of, the rabbis do this all the time, right? Well, it sort of means, but you don't have to take it literally because after all, we really do like our matzah, so we have to, right? So we have to keep these things going, but the 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 point, and I don't know whether the midrash here means that it should be taken perfectly literally, right? I don't know if that's what they mean. But what they certainly mean is that when the Purim story becomes history, real history, not in the form that it's in, but in terms of the way it actually plays out, when that happens, something totally dramatic will change, right? The Messianic age will change. I mean, what does the Rambam believe the Messianic age? It's in the Talmud. The Talmud says the only difference between the Messianic age and now will be that people won't fight wars anymore. Otherwise, things will pretty much be the same. They'll still be rich, they'll still be poor, there'll still be social justice issues. There'll be all kinds of things, but we will not resort to killing each other in order to try to solve these problems because, as the Talmud already knows, it doesn't work, right? You can't really win by killing the other side. So, so I don't know for sure whether they mean this literally or not. I think maybe not. But I do think that what they're saying is, and think about it, is that if we can fully enter into Purim now, right, what we are really saying is we are keeping this going in anticipation of when it will become really real, when it will really be fulfilled. That's what we're doing. So it's kind of like Shabbos with a sense of humor, right? And that is a point that I wanted to make that I've been thinking about for a while. We do have a sense of humor. And it is not necessarily the case that the only way to understand Esther or any other text has to be seriously, right? And particularly Esther. I don't think it needs to be understood in that way, in that sense of being, like, oh, I have to find the deep meaning in this. I think they were having fun. And I think they were having fun at a time when things were not very good for them, whoever they were who wrote this. And they're not very good at this point for us. I mean, we're not living in terrible poverty and people aren't coming and looking for mezuzahs on our doorways in order to beat them down. But this is a place where it's becoming hard to see where is God for us at this moment. How do we know that we're still, we feel like we're being lost, right? That our whole forward direction has been, has been damaged by what's been going on, in the US, in North America, in Israel, but in a whole number of places, right? In Ukraine, in Sudan, all these places where people are killing each other without hesitation, which runs so much counter to who we think we are and what we think we're working towards. And I believe that one of the real differences that we have with our previous ones is with our ancestors is that we have lost touch of that really deep sense of faith and commitment that we're moving in the right direction, no matter how much it might seem that we're not. And I think that's my major point, right? So how does Purim work for me? It works by putting myself for one day in the sense that, yeah, they tried to kill us. Yeah, we did win. Yes, we're really going to eat this time. And this time it's really for real, right? We're not saying that this is something we're hoping that's going to happen. It is for real. And we live out that one day as though that is already true. We know it can't stay that way, but for now, but we can live this way at least for one day, right? One day a week when it comes to be Shabbos, one day a year when it comes to be Purim. We can live that one day in the as though it has already happened. That's why I said, remember, we spent a lot of time last week on chapter 9, right? And why chapter 9 is an anomaly inside the Megillah, right? Because the person or the persons who wrote chapter 9, is it really chapter 9? I always forget. Chapter 10, the last chapter, the little one.
Yeah, chapter.
No.
Huh? Mark, you cut yourself
Chapter
off.
9. Chapter 9.
Yeah, chapter 9. So, somebody turned the whole first 8 chapters into a documentary, right? sort of language. And so they added chapter 9 to complete the documentary. Well, what did they do after they hung after they hung Haman and his kids? Was that the end? Oh no, we really went crazy. But I don't think that I think no matter what interpretation we have of it, other than it is literally history, right? I think any interpretation turns chapter 9 into an anomaly. Like, why is it there? It doesn't seem to serve, a real purpose except to amplify this notion that we won, they lost, we killed them. Right? Yeah.
So when in these texts they're saying, okay, this is what's going to be retained is this Megillah, are they talking about the whole thing, including chapter 9? I mean, in terms of timing of when it was put in there, and how it relates to the Messianic age. I mean, chapter 9 doesn't really seem to fit with what some of these texts are saying, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I don't know when, I really don't know when chapter 9 was written. I don't think any of us know when chapter 9 was written, right? So I can't say. I mean,
It seems odd to put that as something
pardon?
that would be, oh, excuse me. Yeah, it seems odd that would be something that included in what should be retained.
Oh, I see that should
Yeah.
be included in what should be retained. Well, I'm sure there are people who would argue, no, and we'll write the real chapter 9, right? When, because remember, what I said last week was one of the hardest things for us to deal with is not being binary. We think we know how to do it. And we think in some areas of life, we're pretty close to being that way, right? But in so many other parts of the way in which we live and we think, we're quite binary, right? And one of those things is, is it true or false? Right? Did the story really happen or not? Right? Can we prove that chapter 9 is a later edition? I mean, I know there are scholars who believe that, so they must have some indications as to why. And I'm sure I've read them. I just don't remember. But so I think, I just don't know. I mean, in my worldview, if between now and Purim Day, the Mashiach actually came, right? I don't think we would need chapter 9. I don't think that the way in which we would respond to a messianic presence would be to go on a rampage. I don't think that's what we would do.
Would hope not.
Huh? What?
I would hope not.
Yeah, but on the other hand, there are Jews who are doing it right now, depending on what your political orientation is, right? But my orientation says that all this stuff that Jews are doing in the West Bank and in Gaza is wrong. Right?
Yeah.
It should just not, it's not who we are. And there's plenty of Jews in Israel, right, who argue exactly that. This is not who we are. This is not why we came here to reestablish our national identity. We came here because we needed a place to go. Okay,
so, Reb Daniel, we have a couple of hands up. Before you take their questions, I wanted to put into the chat some time ago, I don't remember exactly when it was, Reb Arthur Waskow, blessed memory, invited a number of people to reimagine chapter 9. And the link to that is now in the chat if you want to take a look at it.
All right.
So we have questions from Dan and then Seth.
Okay, I think what I'm going to do is go into the chat and find it. What is this, Steve? Oh, this is you at 4:35. Reb Mark, is that you? In the chat. It's very small print. I can't read it. So
in the chat, it would have been the last thing that I just put in.
Oh, I see.
Scroll
Okay,
down.
yeah, I see. Okay, yeah, I see. Oh, I see. It's a link.
Yeah, it's a link.
Okay. All right, let me just activate the link so that I can look at it later.
Okay.
Okay, I see it. There we go. Okay, thank you. I didn't know about that. Okay, who has the next question?
So we have Dan and then Seth.
Okay.
So, what about Hanukkah? I mean, from the point of view of they tried to do something to us. We stopped them. We won. Um, we were victorious. It's also that sort of story, even though it's not, well, we killed all the Greeks and we killed all the Hellenizers, but it's still a we won type thing. Is that a different type of story or historically or whatever, something different?
Um, well, first of all, I just want to be cautious about globalizing, right? So we're talking about Purim, not talking about every holiday. Having said that, Hanukkah is different. Hanukkah is history. Now, if you've ever read the second book of Maccabees, that's probably not history. That's a midrashic elaboration already on that story. That's where the story of Hannah and her 7 sons can be found. All those sort of the faith stories. Those are part of Second Maccabees. But First Maccabees is written in the Greek style, and it tends to detail, and it is most likely history. It is not history the way we tell the story to our children. No, that's not really the history. But if you read the first book of Maccabees, you get a much better sense of what the history actually is. So in that story, for example, we tell it as they liberated the temple, they couldn't find any oil, and so the oil miraculously lasted for 8 days, and that's it, and that's what Hanukkah is. Let's have latkes, right? That's that's how we tell the story. The story isn't like that. The story is, yes, they liberated the temple, right? They cleaned it out, right? They convened an 8-day holiday. My guess is mostly because they lost the previous holiday they didn't celebrate was Sukkot. So they started an 8-day holiday and they did marching around and singing and all that kind of stuff. The oil story, there is some indication of an oil story that says it would take 8 days for them to get the oil, but there's no indication that the one day of oil burned for 8 days. You don't see that story until the Talmud, which is much later on, right? To probably between 200 and 300 years later, right? That story appears, and it appear well that even that story that doesn't, but the story about how mostly the Talmud deals in the Tractate of Shabbat. It deals with how do you light the menorah, right? And the basic thing of lighting the menorah is one candle a night. That's not one more candle a night or one less candle a night, one a night. If you have a lot of money, right, you can do one and then two and then three and then four, but you got to have a lot of money to do that. So just regular people could do that. But the story of Hanukkah then is a historical story. Whether
But
pardon?
but if I mean, aside from the historicity of it, the it's just isn't it similar in the sense of restoring hope and a messianic age in a sense when the Jews have rededicated the temple, they're rededicating
Yeah,
themselves.
I think you can stretch it that way if you want to. I don't, for myself, I don't see it that way. I mean, I see it as a story that actually happened in a historical period. It lasted for a while. I got to tell you that the rabbis saved the holiday by creating the story of the oil. Because the truth is, they didn't like the Hasmoneans,
Right,
right? They
right.
really didn't like them. And the Hasmoneans screwed it up horribly, right? Within 2 generations, they were fighting civil wars. They were fighting wars of expansion. Think about it. They were fighting wars of expansion. They called the Romans in to arbitrate at one point. The Essenes got started because they couldn't stand the notion of these guys being the high priests because they weren't from the official lineage of the high priest. The Pharisees didn't like them because they kowtowed to the Hellenists, and they were assimilationists, and they didn't like them, and because they usurped, there was a separation of powers that was built into Israelite society, right? You had kings and you had prophets. And that was a separation of, and you had priests, right? So you had kings, priests, and prophets. All of a sudden, here was this one family that became both the kings and the priests, and they had already said prophecy was over. So they had merged everything, right? I mean, we understand that. I mean, that's that's what we're living through right now, right? The usurpation of powers that are meant to be separated and pulled and attempting to pull them together in one office and one person, right? So the rabbis didn't like it, and the holiday of Hanukkah could easily have disappeared. It really could, right? I'll give you one more example, and then maybe we'll go back to Purim. But one more example. I think it's in First Maccabees. There's this Syrian Greek general named Nicanor, and they hate Nicanor. He is the bane of their existence. He has he wins battles against the Maccabees, right? They just really hate him. And they have this big battle at one point, and they capture him and they kill him. And they cut off his head. And they bring that head into Jerusalem. And then, depending on which book of Maccabees you're reading, they hang it up in one place or another, right? And they declare that day to be called Yom Nicanor. And will this not be Yom Nicanor till the end of time? And behold, it is the day right before Yom Mordechai. Oh, so there's a nice connection there. So what's Yom Mordechai? Oh, what's Yom Mordechai? Mordechai's day. Which is Mordechai's day? Oh, come on. I'm not going on until one of you at least tries a guess.
Purim. Purim.
Hey, Purim.
Purim.
Yeah, they called Purim Yom Mordechai. That's what they called it, right? So that's Yom Mordechai. Tell me something. Do we observe Yom Nicanor one day before Yom Mordechai? Anybody hear of it? No.
No.
What do we do on what was declared Yom Nicanor, the 13th day of Adar? What do we do? What do we call that day?
Fast of Esther.
Fast of
The
Esther.
fast of Esther. Now, did Esther fast on the day before Purim, according to the story? No. Right? Esther fasted about almost a year before, right? So why did they do that? They turned this political military victory experience, right, into a fast day. Because what happened, right? The Syrian Greeks came back and they fought this war for a decade, I think. I don't know, the book of Maccabees has it exactly by month and by year and all of that. And then these Hasmoneans, when they finally won and took over the land again, they screwed it up. Right? So, in my humble opinion, Hanukkah is another one of those holidays. Let's put it this way. Hanukkah is another one of those holidays that has gone through a lot of transformations in terms of why we keep it. Right? Those of us who are old enough will remember that, when the Six-Day War happened and Israel won this great, victory over odds, right? Heavy odds. It invigorated Hanukkah, right, in Israel and here, right? It just did, right? It became, the great holiday of the Jewish nationalist resurgence. Right? And that's what it did. Now, for those of us who think, well, that resurgence was short-lived and also very damaged, right? I mean, I hate to say it this way, but I see it in many ways as a repetition, right? That we got cocky, right? And we thought we could bring a messianic moment into the world by force of arms. That's what we thought we could do. And we know that we can't do that. We already know that, but we tried anyway. So Hanukkah has gone through a lot of different things. And part of what has made Hanukkah survivable is the menorah, is that story of the oil, right? Because that story of the oil is independent of anything real in history, right? It's just, if it took 8 days and then somehow this, that one candle survived for 8 days, and isn't that wonderful? But it's not like, it's not central to the Maccabean story, really, right? It's something that was created to give Hanukkah a timelessness. So I don't see it as much in terms of messianic. I see that the rabbis salvaged Hanukkah as a way of, with a safe way of remembering the victory, right? And not overdoing it and turning it into a story of how God saved us. That's a long-winded answer, response. But that's why, so I want to be careful. I don't want to generalize. To me, Purim is unique in our holiday structure because it's a comedy, right? It's what it is. It's a play, which is a comedy about a history which has not yet happened, and which we hope will happen. And so we don't want to lose sight of that. Why do we want to keep on, observing Purim, having Purim? Because it stands for something that we all really hope will happen speedily soon and in our lifetimes, right? Right? That it should happen now. And we put ourselves into that space. And how do we do that? We do that by obliterating the differences between good and evil, right? Getting tipsy enough so that we don't know the difference between cursed is Haman and I told you the Grateful Dead, not the Grateful Dead, the Country Joe and the Fish, the way they did it. Didn't I say that last week?
Yes, you did.
I did. Okay.
Reb Daniel, I want to make sure that we recognize Seth has a question, and then I have a comment. Seth?
Okay. Yeah, I forgot. Thank you. Seth?
Hi. I do want to say something about Purim, but first I just want to say there is something that I read about the Talmudians vanishing from the street or from the market as being the advent of the Messianic age. But let me just say, in terms of Purim,
the who vanished from the street?
Talmudians, in the Talmud it says the Talmudians have to Talmudians. I don't know how you say it.
I don't know who they are. Go ahead. Okay.
Okay, I can send you the reference later. Yeah. So you were talking previously about Midrash Mishlei, and you said you wanted the context. So I looked that up. I don't know. Are you interested in me sharing that?
Yeah, sure. What's the context?
So first of all, it's from chapter 9 of Proverbs, and which says, "Wisdom has built her house; she has hewn her 7 pillars," which Rashi says that is the creation of the world. And she has prepared the feast, mixed the wine, and also set the table. So it says that Rabbi Abahu said that this is Esther the queen, as at the time that trouble came to Israel in the days of Mordechai. What did she do? She set up a meal for Achashverosh and Haman, the evildoer, and she got him very drunk with wine. And the evildoer thought to himself that she was granting him honor, and he did not know that she had opened a trap for him. From that which she got him drunk with wine, she acquired her people forever. And then it says she even prepared her table, that she set herself up a table in this world and in the world to come.
Okay. So thank you, because the key part of that was the part before the part that I read, right? So anyway, thank you. That's good. That helps. That's helpful. Now, you had something else, or was that it?
I had something, and
Yes,
I just put in the chat the link to what Seth alluded to, from Mishlei, Midrash Mishlei,
Right.
on which they answered your question about what was the context. What I want to say was that interestingly, we chant Al Hanisim on both Hanukkah and Purim.
Yeah.
So there is a connection there that the rabbis made, and they don't refrain from mentioning the war. So if we're looking at both Hanukkah and Purim, which was never your objective, but Dan brought it up, and making the connection that in both cases the rabbis totally steered away from advertising the war, but instead found a way to advertise the miracle. In Al Hanisim, it mentions both. Al Hanisim v'al Purkan v'al Gvura Hatshur v'al HaMilchamot she'asito lavotenu.
Except in Mizrahi tradition, right? It doesn't say v'al HaMilchamot. It says v'al HaNechamot.
I like that.
That's how I do it. So yes. Look, I'm not saying that they didn't say that there was a war. I mean, they knew there was a war, and they knew that in Hanukkah times, right? There is a victory. But here's an interesting thing about the nature of the holiday, because on Hanukkah, we say Al Hanisim, and we also say something else. Two other things, actually. Thing number one is we say Hallel.
Right.
We don't say Hallel on Purim. Why don't we say Hallel on Purim? Because it didn't happen in the land. That's the rabbinic answer. Clearly, it was already, that was already the practice, but nevertheless, we, we don't say Hallel. We do say Hallel on Hanukkah, right? And we do say the full Hallel on Hanukkah the way we do on Sukkot, right? Because on Pesach, we only do what they call the half Hallel after the second day. And we don't even pick it back up again on the last day, right? We have this slightly abbreviated Hallel for that, right? Shavuot, we have a full Hallel, but that's only one day. I mean, technically speaking, right? It's only one day. We don't say Hallel on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, but we don't say Hallel on Purim. And the rabbinic answer to that is because Purim happened outside the land, right? So that's why, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, who was Mordechai? Mordechai's a bureaucrat, right? He was, I don't know if he was a civil servant as well, but both he and Haman are bureaucrats. That's what they are. Right? They're important in the king's, litany of things. Mordechai becomes much more important. Mordechai's just a bit player, and so is Haman for a while, and then Haman becomes a star, and Mordechai stays a bit player, and Haman gets upset, but that's the story, right? That's the story. So that's that one thing is that there's no Hallel on Purim, right? And there was another one. Oh yeah, and on Hanukkah, there is a Torah reading. Right, we reread the part in Bamidbar of the offerings that all of the leaders of the tribes brought. Purim, if I'm remembering correctly, there is no Torah reading. Am I remembering correctly? Somebody tell me hopefully I am, but maybe I'm not. Yeah, I don't remember a Torah reading on Purim. Right? Yeah, you see, the only reference, by the way, one of the, I think I said this to you, the classic reference is that why, if we had already accepted the Torah at Sinai, why does it say that we accepted it on Purim? Right? Ki yamu v'kiblu. Why is that? You know the answer to that one? You don't have to. It's a little piece of rabbinic trivia, as it were. One piece of rabbinic trivia about this is, why did we accept the Torah? Because God lifted the mountain over our heads and said, how would you like to accept the Torah? And if you say yes, I put the mountain back. If you say no, I drop it on your heads. What do you choose? So the question is immediately asked in the Gemara right there. The question is immediately asked. Well, then we can say, no, we were given the Torah under coercion. We never really accepted it. We don't need it. We don't want it. Oh no, right? What does it say in Esther? Ki yamu v'kiblu, right? We sustained it and we accepted it. So what happened then? We accepted it voluntarily, right? We did it without the coercion of the that's when we fulfilled what we had actually said way back in the desert time, we think, called Nasev and Nishma, right? Let's do it and let's hear it, right? So Purim becomes a second receiving of the Torah in that sense. And that fits well with what I'm saying, right? With what I'm thinking about. Because what does the Torah say? We came out of Egypt, we're on our way to something better. And if we screw up on the way to that, we'll just have to start over again, and then we'll start over again, and we'll screw up again, and then we'll start over again, right? And that's what we sort of committed to. I mean, the Torah doesn't like the idea that we're going to blow it and then have to reinstate it, but unfortunately, that's what we did more than once, right? So the Purim story as a story becomes a second acceptance of the Torah. That's where it comes from. But there's no Torah reading, because it's not that kind of holiday, right? It really, I'm going to say in my sort of Western thoughtful way that I'm going to say that's because this story has not yet become real. And maybe when it becomes real, we will have a Torah reading for it. But as of now, this is the way it goes. Anybody, this was also designed to be a session with a little bit more freer discussion, which we've had. And if we want to continue having a little bit more of it, I still have a couple more things I'd like to share, but we'll see what happens.
Mary Rita has her hand up.
Okay,
Yep, let me see.
so this just dovetails with your last comment, but maybe there also is not a Torah reading because Maccabees is not seen as part of the is not seen as part of the Tanakh, right? The Maccabees is
The books of Maccabees are not part of the Tanakh, but there is a Torah reading on Hanukkah.
Oh, right. I'm getting Purim. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm doing what Dan did.
I am very tolerant of anything like that because I do it so often myself that it's fine. So, but you didn't have to disappear. Who did? Oh no, that was Michael and Esther moved up to the next top left on my screen. Okay, anything else? Anybody?
Okay, it looks like Michael and Esther have a question if their hand is up.
I just wonder, since I view this all as a farmer, and I have a farmer's perspective, which comes out in Farbrengen, but is not part of this world necessarily. Does the Torah indicate it in some codification what's real and what's fantasy, or what's not real, or what's false?
I'm not quite sure what you're thinking of when you ask the question that way.
I guess you've introduced this world of codification and Torah being true, which is not my worldview. Is there any indication on what's meant? Because I think you've indicated that there is codification of what's real and what's not.
It's story.
Yeah, I can't remember using the word codification. And so I don't really know what you're referring to. I believe this is now we're going to go a little bit farther afield, but I believe that the Torah is true. That does not mean that every detail of an event that the Torah tells is true, exactly the way they tell it. It may not mean that. For example, I've been studying for quite some time now because it's a very, very long book, but the book called the Toldot Yaakov Yosef, right? The stories, the generations of Yaakov Yosef, who is Yaakov Yosef of Polnoya, the first major student of the Baal Shem Tov. Most of what we know about the Baal Shem Tov, we know by reading his book, because he'll say, and I heard from my teacher. And when he says that, he means the Baal Shem. And what he says over and over again, which a lot of the Hasidic Rebbes don't bother to repeat anymore, is that the Torah doesn't tell its stories because they're good stories. Because after all, what do we need them for, right? Why do we need to know the story of Joseph in Egypt? Like, what does that mean? Who cares? It happened a long time ago. And look, we're North Americans, right? We have a history attention span of maybe 10 years. Right? So why, what's the big deal? Why do we keep them? And he says the principle that we work under is that the Torah has to be true for all generations, which means that I need to understand the story. Now, for us, that's so obvious, right? We'll say, well, sure, we want to know about Joseph because we want to know about faith in God. We want to know about when you lose the faith in God, and all that. So it stands for things, right? So he would say, yes, it happened the way the Torah says it happened, and it also means other things, right? I don't particularly as much care whether the stories are literally true or not. I think most of them are in some way, but we don't really know, because to do that kind of work, you got to have external corroborating evidence. You can't say, right? How do I know it's true? The Bible tells me so, right? Well, that's not a proof, right? It's got to be this archaeological discovery shows that what the Bible was saying in this place could likely have been true. Right? So that's what we need, in our time. But I do believe that there is truth. I mean, it's why, sort of as a congregational rabbi, reading the book of Leviticus is always very difficult because how do you give a Dvar Torah week after week after week about the book of Leviticus, and how does it matter whether it's this animal or that animal and this sacrifice or that sacrifice? None of that stuff relates to us anymore. Right? But it does, right? Well, the Hasidic Rebbes make a point of showing you how this is meant to be understood and how it's useful for us. So that's how I look at it, right? I would say, for example, that like I think I said at the very beginning, there are times when I look at my own life, when I look at the Torah, and I see the agricultural significance of what it's writing about, and I endorse it and support it and wish more people understood it better, because it would ground us in ways, which is what the early Zionists wanted, right? That's what they thought, right? We'll go back to the land and we'll work the land. And we'll eat what we grow, right? And we will restore our organic connection to the land, right? From which we came, and we'll do it in the way that our ancestors did it. And that was a wonderful myth. I mean, we loved it. I loved it. It was a great idea, right? But if you look now at what percentage of Israelis are actually involved in agriculture, it's tiny, right? Because they've just gone the way the whole world has gone in that. But you see, so I'm just saying that there are I don't want to overgeneralize, Michael. I want to make sure that this stays limited because I'm not trying to present an overarching philosophy that includes every possibility, right? I'm just not doing that. What does it mean if you were to ask me, what does it mean to me to read the Torah from the perspective of a rabbi who is living outside of the Jewish community, right? Who doesn't have a synagogue to go to, when I ask what is that about for me, I talk a lot about the seasons and the gardens and the darkness and the quiet, and except in the last few days when there have been two dueling chainsaws outside my house. So, but that's a rural sound these days, I'm sure. So you see what I'm saying? I can look at it in different ways, and some piece of Judaism or multiple pieces of it will squeeze themselves out of that. They won't fit, right? But a lot of them will, and it's a good way to tell the story, right? It's a good way to do it. So for right now, it makes more sense to me to tell the story of Esther as a comedy play of an anticipated future which has not yet happened. And why is that important? Because we live in that anticipation, right? That has been a guiding principle for us for centuries. Why is it a guiding principle for centuries? Because the same problem reappears constantly, right? How do you do Purim if you're in, God forbid, in a concentration camp? How do you do Purim if the Crusaders are at the door of the city? How do you do these? How do you manage that? And that's the commitment that has allowed us to do that, is a sense of the future, of a future towards which we are all working, right? We're not working, let's just say, just to reacquaint ourselves with the annual cycle of nature, but with the what do you call it, like a corkscrew approach to it, right? That yes, spring comes again, but when spring comes again, we're another year beyond, right? So either I'm older, or we're a little bit closer, or the world is a little more peaceful, or it's not a little more peaceful. You know what I'm saying? It's not just a repeating cycle, right? And it's that which has more, I think, than most of us recognize. That is what has kept us vibrant and committed, right? I mean, why do we do this? I mean, my grandfather was a left social revolutionary. He wasn't a Zionist. He didn't believe in separate Jewish political parties in the diaspora. He believed that good Jews join progressive movements. That's what you do, right? And he was a revolutionary socialist. I mean, he was not opposed to violence, used carefully, right? And that's what that was his vision of how you get to the Messianic period. Did that work in the short run? No. In the long run, maybe. Maybe it's already being resurrected in certain ways, and maybe it will be even more a stronger story than it once was. But what kept him going was this vision of a better world in which Jews and non-Jews, Christians and Jews, all somehow got along and lived together and didn't necessarily have to create national states in order to do that. Right? That was what he said. I think he was ahead of his time. I hope he was ahead of his time rather than an anachronism, right? But for a long time, he and all the people who he worked with were considered anachronisms, right? Look at Jewish renewal. I mean, when I first got involved in it, what was Jewish renewal? Somebody asked me recently, what was my ordination process? I said, it won't matter to you because it was completely idiosyncratic, right? It was Zalman saying to me, would you like to get ordained? And I said, okay. He said, I said, what do you want me to do? He said, well, read this and read that and come and talk to me every so often. And I'll make cassette tapes of my classes and mail them to you. Okay. Now, even in Aleph, right, you don't get ordained that way anymore, right? That's gone. But in those days, I didn't even realize it until afterwards, but Zalman was not who he was when he passed away. Zalman was a pariah in Canada. Right? He was a Hasidic rabbi a Kohen, who had divorced his wife, married a Gioret, a convert, right? Which is like totally forbidden. Yeah? And then divorced her and so on. And he wasn't the great Rebbe in those days, right? A good thing I didn't know that, right? Because it was, in the end, it was my job to legitimate him, right? By being a good rabbi. So, but things were different in those days, right? They were just different. That's how, I don't know. If I started that somewhere, I'm sure I'm supposed to come back to it, but can't quite do it. So, but you see what I'm saying, right? That there's all these things change and it's how you want to look at it. Lately, right, as I say, on and off, not all the time, but on and off since Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. And it was she died, I think, right before Kol Nidre, right in 1 year, right? Like a day before Yom Kippur or something like that. And it was crushing, right? The last time I felt crushed like that was when I was watching the California primary in which was it? Must have been, I was graduating from college, so it must have been 1964. And I'm watching the California primary, and there is Kennedy on his way to winning the primary. And I'm thinking, great, Robert Kennedy's going to win the primary. He's going to wipe the floor with Richard Nixon. And then the war is going to be over. And right, things are going to get much better. Messianic expectation. I fall asleep in front of the TV. I wake up. And what do I see? Kennedy's dead on the floor. Right? Shot. That's what happened in that half hour that I fell asleep, right? My world crumbled in that sense, right? I haven't felt that way since, in stages when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and I started asking, why didn't she retire when she had a chance so that they could have appointed a more liberal justice? Why did Biden pretend that he wasn't, he had said from the beginning he was a transitional president. He did a great job of being a transitional president and then threw it away by being, and by his staff protecting him, right? Which should not, which to me was like, how come, right? Why are the good guys making these really stupid mistakes that are costing us, the most precious things we're working toward? And why should I continue caring? So Purim tells me, right, continue caring, right? You know how it's going to be. This is like one of those times that the story tells you. The story says, it can get really bad, but when it gets really bad, what happens, right? So Mordechai says, "Revach v'hatzalah ya'amod lanu mimakom acher." Right? If you, Esther, fail in this job, then redemption and salvation will happen to us from another place. Right? Now, the person I was talking to yesterday said, well, that means that Mordechai is saying, yes, somebody else, we'll find somebody else. If you can't do it or you don't do it, then we'll find somebody else who can. The traditional sort of rabbinic response to that is that's the only reference to God in the Megillah. Right? So if you can't do it, Esther, then somehow God will find a way to make it happen. Right? I think that's the key line of the whole Megillah in a lot of ways, right? That's where we are. So we're reading the Megillah, we're having a great time. We're saying it is as though this has already happened, right? Haman is gone, Mordechai is in, finally, climate change is being dealt with the way it should be dealt with, and all these things, right? That these will happen at some point, and that's what we're doing by celebrating Purim and celebrating it as though it had already happened, making noise, having parties, right? Drinking a little bit, playing with the kids, putting on costumes. All of these things are really, in my way of looking at it, are ways of saying we are still committed to the notion that things will get better. We are still committed to the Messianic idea. And by the way, I don't mean, a man riding in on a donkey. I mean, that's not what I mean. But that somehow, in some way, this will happen. This will come to fruition, and it will come to fruition in a way that isn't short-lived, right? That is going to be around for quite a while. And that's what we're trying to do, right? And that's why we keep it, and that's why we keep at it. And that's, I think, in this particular moment, right? It may be that next year, God willing, next year it'll look different, in fact, right? We don't know how. What?
Amen. Amen.
Yeah, we don't know how that will happen, but we're hoping that it will, right? Do I know what's going to... The only thing, so I want to conclude, if I may. I know I'm running, well, I'm just at the time, right? So let me just conclude with this one more thing. What was I thinking about? It just happened. I did a slight detour. Now I can't come back. Let me just see if it's in a note somewhere. Oh yes, I got it. One of the other teachings that I picked up from my friend Yaakov Yosef, the Rabbi of Polnoya, disciple of the Baal Shem in the early 18th century, he says there are two kinds of people. Now, of course, what he means by that is there are Gentiles and there are Jews, but let's just say there are two kinds of people. There are people who live all their lives in the world of rationality. And there are people who live part of the time in rationality and part of the time in the beyond. Right? And the secret of longevity, the secret of staying committed is to be in both worlds, right? Is to go beyond the limitations of this world and live in the anticipation of the presence of the eternal, right? To go into a different consciousness. That's why it's worth it to pray. That's why it's worth it to read the Megillah, right? That's why it's worth it to get drunk or just tipsy enough that we can't tell the difference between good and bad for a while, because we know, not because good and bad merge into each other, but because good and bad are parts of each other. They're parts of the same whole, and we understand that, right? We come to understand that, the great paradoxes, right? That God is the source of everything. So that's what he says, and I think it was a teaching that just touched me, because that is, right? How do we know? Like, people will say, well, Trump's going to run for a third term. Well, you can only say that if you live only in this world, right? In the material world. You don't know. We don't know, right? He could die. They could catch him. That funny story that's been circulating, about Rachel Maddow saying that J.D. Vance, and the cabinet invoked the 25th Amendment. I don't know. A friend of a friend happened to see it. It's a month or more old. But I went and found it just because I knew it was fake, but I wanted to see how it was. But the point is, who knows, right? There are such things as events, things that take place that are not predictable by the limitations of the knowledge we have, if we acknowledge that we don't have complete knowledge, right? Trump is going to turn 80. Is he going to live for another 3 years to finish out his term? Is nothing going to change in all that time? Is it only going to get worse? We don't know that, right? And if we look around at what's going on, there are all kinds of things that are happening that are possibilities for change to take place even before the midterms, right? It could happen. So if we are aware of that, if we live in, at least partially, in that awareness that there is a level of reality which is beyond the mundane, which we can access, and through which time does interesting things, and we begin to understand that, what we're doing is going to happen. And I don't believe that it might happen. I believe it's going to happen. But last night I said to God when I was outside, well, it looks a lot like I'm not going to be the one who sees it. But hopefully my children, my grandchildren will see it. I don't know. I certainly hope so. But it's looking like I don't have enough time left for this to come. And I said, okay, that's how it is. But I believe it, right? I still believe it. So I want to just leave you with that. And one last thing, which is a wonderful take on a teaching of Reb Nachman's. It's not accurately done, but it is a take on his teaching. And it goes, ואפילו בהסתרה, right? Even in hiding. שבתוך ההסתרה, that a hiding within a hiding, right? Because in Devarim in the Torah, God says, when I'm angry at you, v'aster astir panai, right? I will hide, yes, I will hide. So Reb Nachman says there is a hiding of God. And in that hiding of God, you still know there's a God, but it's hiding, right? But there is another level of hiding within hiding. And when that happens, you even forget that there's a God. Even then, right, his teaching says, and the song says, right, that even then, God is saying, I'm with you. I've got your back. You may not see me, you may not feel me, right? But I've got your back. May I do it once, Rabbi?
Please.
Okay. So it was in that Israeli not a sitcom, but soap opera about what are they called in Israel? The the very black hat. What's the name for them in Hebrew?
Haradim.
Charedim. Thank you. It's not that I don't know it, it's that I can't pull it out. And so the Charedim. So it was a soap opera about Charedim. But it goes like this. ואפילו בהסתרה, שבתוך ההסתרה, בוודאי גם שם נמצא השם יתברך. So even in the hiding of the hiding, there you can find the blessed God, right? ואפילו בהסתרה, שבתוך ההסתרה, בוודאי גם שם נמצא השם יתברך. אוי 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 אוי, גם מאחורי הדברים הקשים העוברים עליך, even after all of the difficult things that pass through your life. אני עומד, אני עומד, אני עומד. I'm standing there, right? גם אוי 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 אוי, גם מאחורי הדברים הקשים העוברים עליך, אני עומד, אני עומד, אני עומד.